Yeah. Yeah. So thank you all for being here. Good evening. My name is Eric Reeves. I am Managing Director of Duchossois Capital Management, and I am Chair of the Legal Forum here at the Executives Club. Thank you again so much for being here to hear about this very intriguing topic of white-collar crime, or how good employees can make bad decisions. In the last few years, there have been a number of headline-grabbing stories like Lori Loughlin, Martin Shkreli, Elizabeth Holmes, Paul Manafort, people who are now facing the consequences for crimes like bribery, tax evasion, and fraud very, very publicly. Some of these were celebrity bombshells, while others made household names of people otherwise unknown. Needless to say, their stories leave the rest of us wondering how people begin to believe their fraudulent actions are acceptable and why they won't get caught. Our speaker tonight, Kelly Richmond Pope, can illuminate this for us, and she is here to tell us about the white-collar crime cases that she has studied extensively, including America's largest municipal fraud case just down the road here in Dixon, Illinois. Kelly is an accounting expert, an author, a filmmaker, and a professor at DePaul University, and brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to this subject. Before we dive into this discussion, please take a quick look at the bio sheets found at your seats, where you can learn more about Kelly and her impressive career. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Kelly Richmond Pope.
So I can talk pretty loud. Like, this is like the size of the classroom. So can you hear me in the back all the way? Because your ears might start bleeding if I use the mic. But if you can't, then because everyone thinks they talk loud and they really don't. But if you're a professor, you talk loud because you're used to a large room. So as Eric said, my name is Kelly, and we have a little under an hour together. So I'm going to give you an introduction. We're going to do a crash course in fraud my way, and we're going to talk about a couple case analysis. We can have discussion as we go. And then we'll do a wrap up. So it's going to move a little quicker than you may like, but as we start getting into these cases, you're just like, how did this happen? Why did this happen? So one of the ways I like to describe myself is I'm a left-handed CPA who uses filmmaking to teach life lessons about decision making. So I am an accountant by training. I am a CPA, but I like to say I'm a creative accountant in a good way, not a bad way. I really love to use film as a way to teach and show people how you can fall victim to fraud, or how people can think about and rationalize really bad decisions. So we're going to start with a quick icebreaker, because everyone thinks that they would catch it, right? We're going to talk about Dixon, Illinois, and so that's what the basis is of my documentary. And Dixon, Illinois, or in Dixon, there was a $53 million fraud. And everybody thinks, if I was from Dixon, if I lived in Dixon, I would catch it. Clearly, surely someone would realize that amount of money would be missing, right? Yes? Okay, so we're going to do a quick icebreaker. Everyone's quiet. You're going to start talking. And so if you've done this exercise before, don't share the answer, but just watch the screen.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
But I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away. It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
So how many of you noticed that 21 things changed in front of your face? So,
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
But I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
okay, so raise your hand if you notice 20 changes. Okay, 10 changes. 5, 2, 1. What did you notice in the back? The rolling pin. Okay, the rolling pin changed. You guys do realize that the person on the ground was a completely different person. They changed the person on the ground. And so I love this exercise because what it really goes to show you is we don't often know what fraud looks like or what a fraudulent person looks like. All I said was look at the screen. Just like you walk into an organization and you just walk in, you just work with people and they all seem ethical, right? Everyone in this room is ethical. Everyone that you work with is ethical, right? We think so. And so here, if I had said, take a look and pay attention to anything that might change, you would have been razor focused. But you weren't locked on that. I just said, look at the screen. So as we start talking about some of these cases, if you missed everything in your icebreaker, go easy on some of the people in the case because there were a lot of things that changed and you didn't pick up on. So if you were in Dixon, you might not have picked up on those either. So how did all this start for me? I did my PhD in accounting at Virginia Tech, and I'm a CPA, but I really loved fraud, and I know that sounds like a weird sentence, and I know what this is like last week. I like fraud because I think it's a great way to understand where accounting breaks down. And so how all this started for me, this is a picture of the house I grew up in. I'm from Durham, North Carolina originally, so you might hear a little Southern accent. And the house behind this house was another Tudor-style house, and his family lived there by the name of the Georges. And Mr. George worked for Nations Bank at the time, which is now Bank of America. And I always, as a little girl, noticed Mr. George because he had the nicest car in the neighborhood. And so he got a new car like every 3 years. I was like, gosh, why does Mr. George always have a nice car? So, you just, Mr. George, you'd see Mr. George, you'd see Mrs. George, you would see their son. And then one day, Mr. George just disappeared. You didn't see him anymore. And I was wondering, where did Mr. George go? The car is gone, Mr. George is gone, but his wife and child are still there. Well, this is what happened to Mr. George. This is an article from the late 80s. And it says, ex-banker faces prison term and fine. So former Nations Bank executive Thurman E. George faces a prison sentence of more than 200 years on his conviction for defrauding the bank of more than $2 million. And so according to, down here in the last paragraph, according to prosecutors, Mr. George schemed with Durham developer Gary Lynn Wallace to remove from Nations Bank's books a series of improper loans that Mr. George had made to Mr. Wallace in the 1980s. And so I knew him. I knew his family. And now we know why he had a nice car all the time. But, this stuck with me because I was in high school when this happened. And it always shocked me that how someone who could seem to have everything, nice family, his house, the car, could risk it all to engage in something like this. Why did he do it? So that really is what sparked my interest when I was in graduate school. And so my dissertation was about ethical reasoning of accounting students. But really, this is the story that never really went away, because why would someone risk it all? And so this statistic is really important because what Mr. George represents and what the stories that we're going to talk about tonight represent are insiders. And we spend a lot of time talking about external threats, but insiders, your employees, your colleagues, are people that we often need to think about as well, because inside threats account for nearly 75% of security breach incidents. So this is why internal controls matter, why it's important. And so we're going to do our first crash course in fraud schemes. And so there's just a laundry list of things here: funds theft, check fraud, vendor invoicing and false billing, credit card fraud, merchandise property theft, expense fraud, payroll fraud, loan fraud. You know, things that we see all the time, that we hear about in the media all the time. Driver's license, phishing schemes, Ponzi schemes, just numerous examples of insider type fraud that happens in organizations all the time. So I'm gonna give you, because you know I'm a professor, so I have a worksheet, right? So I want to talk about this because this is something that you can take with you, and it's something that I use with my graduate students, and my graduate students work full time, so I try to give them and talk about things that they can take back at work and sort of think about and help with their teams. And so one of the things, as the worksheets go around, one of the things that I want you to focus on is the fraud triangle. And it's something that we talk about in my graduate forensic accounting class, and it really helps us understand how fraud can happen and how that good employee, that good colleague can make a really poor decision. And so there's three pieces of the fraud triangle: opportunity, pressure, and rationalization. And but what's really important is the fact that opportunity is the only aspect of the fraud triangle that a business can control, which is why our internal controls become very important. So when you think about the fraud triangle, where I spend a lot of my time with people is this rationalization component. So when I'm not teaching at DePaul, I go around the country with a team of people, and we do on-camera interviews with whistleblowers, white-collar felons, and victims of fraud. And we take these stories back and turn them into teaching cases or training workshops. But it's the rationalization where I'm just fascinated because, again, why did Mr. George risk it all? Why did Rita Crunwell risk it all? What is so different about her that would make her do something like that? So that's where my fascination came from. I'm just a little bit nosy. So, but when we think about the fraud triangle, I thought this was a really good figure because it really supports why opportunity is so important. When we think about this, we can all think about the pressure that we have. And 21% of the fraud cases from this study, people talk about pressure is what drove them to engage in fraud. But it's the opportunity. And we often all have opportunity to engage. And so this is why insider threats are so important. So for my travels, I just started coming up with a list of why I think employees engage in fraud. And I do a lot of interviews with people. It started when 7 years ago when I met this felon at a fraud conference. It sounds weird, it just sounds weird, but it works. And so I met this felon at this fraud conference, and I said, I really want to document your story. And he said, well, sure, no one's ever asked me that. And I said, but I want to document more stories, but I don't know a lot of felons. And he said, well, I know plenty. Who do you want to know? And really that relationship is what started me meeting all of these felons and just getting these stories and really trying to learn where did they go wrong. So one story turned into the next, and so it just now have like tons of hard drives with these stories on them. But that rationalization of why they did it or how they did it was really interesting to me. But some of the things that I've learned just doing these interviews over the year is a lot of times people don't know what fraud looks like, just like the first icebreaker. I'm not talking about the blatant things, but the things that start small that we all might do, we don't often think about it as fraud. And those small things can turn into really large things. Something else that I've heard in my interviews with people is they really believe that they're helping the company. They believe that by saving jobs, or by engaging in certain transactions to boost the stock price, we'll get acquired, and that helps everyone. So they really believe that they're helping the company. Oftentimes, it's the company culture. And you'll see that in a couple of the cases that we'll talk about. the behavior is rewarded. Just do this. I don't care how you do it, and that behavior is rewarded. And the benefit outweighs the cost. And so these are some of the things that I've just learned over a 10-year period of talking to all of these people, whether they're victims, whether they're white-collar felons, and whether they're whistleblowers. They all talk about why they think people engage in fraud. So one of the first interviews I did this is probably 10 years ago, I met this gentleman, Weston Smith. And Weston was a CFO at Health South. And so I just put an excerpt from his an article that he wrote. And as you see, Weston turned out to be a white-collar felon. But he was a CFO. And so I want to read to you what he said, because his quote is really important, because never in a million years would I have imagined being in prison. And if none of us would have ever imagined, if I said, would you ever think that you would ever end up in a federal prison? We would all say absolutely not. Weston was that person. He said, after all, I had always done all the right things. How on earth have I become a convicted felon? Simple. I crossed the line. In business and in our personal lives, we're constantly faced with situations of crossing the line. I'm not writing about $3 billion frauds. I'm talking about everyday life. The small temptations to cross the line are always there. And so what Weston did is he was the fifth CFO in a rotation of CFOs at Health South. And his job was to conceal the fraud at Health South. And he really felt like he was a team player. He was saving jobs. They wanted to be acquired. And so he felt that he was doing the right thing. And so what he did is, when he was arrested and he was sentenced to federal prison, he was in federal prison and he was reflecting on how I got here. So he wrote this really great article, published in one of our accounting journals, about his situation. And so this next, I don't expect you to read this, but he starts off with it's December 2005. I'm in my prison bed. How did this happen to me? So if you're ever interested in really reading a great article from a person that is really telling you how they were sucked into this case, it's Weston. He does a lot of speaking around the country. And it's just a fascinating story, because he'll also tell how he's been approached by companies because he was engaged in fraud and knew how to sort of cover it up, which is not why you want a job. But really great article that he talks about. A, it was the culture. B, the CEO really rewarded this behavior. And his CEO said, I hired my CFOs to handle everything. And so he was rewarded for that type of behavior. So this is the Health South case. But I love Weston's story, because when he reflects, he says, I'm an ethical person. I would have never thought that I would end up here, but unfortunately he did. Yes?
Is it okay to ask a question?
Sure.
So you called this the Health South case and you're about to move on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so did I hear you right? He's the fifth?
He was the
Of a
fifth
rotation.
CFO in a rotation of
And his
CFO.
job was to conceal.
Yeah, I mean, that's so they didn't go outside of Health South to find a CFO, because they wanted someone inside that knew how to conceal their fraud. So
And did the CEO go to jail or get penalized?
So Richard Scrushy was the CEO at the time, and Richard Scrushy was convicted in a civil suit for the fraud, not federal. So in a civil case, he
So
was.
fine and no jail.
He ended up going to jail because he bribed someone for a board seat on a hospital board, but not for the accounting fraud federally. It's a fascinating story. But what he was able to do was to convince a jury that my CFOs did this. I'm not an accountant. That's what they did. And so I don't know if you've ever been a jury member on an accounting trial, but it's probably not the funnest thing to hear about a bunch of debits and credits and when you're recognizing revenue. And if you don't have that background, you're probably don't understand what's going on, or you're either bored to death about what they're saying. And so he was really effective in telling people, my CFOs did this, not me. Yeah.
So you said the magic words. I was going to ask this at some point. I remember seeing data like 10 or 15 years ago about how many of these the really big frauds involve revenue recognition, and it's partly because that's how people get their incentive pay. So is that still true?
I think it is, because revenue recognition is such a gray area, especially when you think about like software sales. I mean, I think you still see revenue recognition as one of the big areas, because it's so great in practice, but so theoretical when we're teaching it. If there's 4 rules, these are the rules, you're shaking your head like, but when it's in practice, it's very different. What we tell you in the book is very different in terms of practice. So it's still an issue. You still see it a lot. So,
Good question.
yeah.
But don't you think Wells Fargo's situation has kind of changed that approach, or just kind of changed the way that people think about revenue incentives?
Say more.
So essentially, Wells Fargo, there's a bad practice of them opening accounts without customer consent, and so as a result, and I work in banking, a lot of banks have changed their incentive programs around that. So I'm just wondering, in your opinion, do you think a lot of companies that are outside of financial services have kind of followed suit, seeing that could happen in their industry?
So I think you can change policy, but changing the way people behave can be a lot more challenging. And so I think that you can change a policy, but do people follow that policy is a whole different volume. So are you doing training around what people think and how people reason through different scenarios is different than changing the policy. So I do think, you'll see a lot of policy changes, but how do people interpret policy can be very different. So that's mine. Okay. So another person, and this is a bit short video clip. Let me make sure I'm watching the time. I'm sure somebody's watching the time. So about 6 years ago, we were going around and talking to people, and had the pleasure of meeting this gentleman. This is Mark Whitacre. And Mark Whitacre was a president at ADM. So this is a clip. He's talking about the international price fixing scandal that happened with ADM. But what I want you to hear and talk about is how he found himself involved in it. And that's what's really important.
My name's Mark Whitacre. I grew up in a very small town in southern Ohio, about an hour north of Cincinnati, called Morrow, Ohio. Population of about 1,000 people. I've been with my wife, Ginger, since she was in 7th grade, and I was in the 8th grade, and she was treasurer of the class, and I'm senior class president. And I went to Ohio State University after I graduated from high school. I got my bachelor's and master's through an honors combined program in science, where I received both of those in 4 years. And then I received a full scholarship to Cornell University in New York, where I got my PhD in nutritional biochemistry at age 25. I'm convinced that white-collar criminals are made, not born. And the background that I have is really even further proof of that. There was no criminality at all shown in my background. The ADM was the company that I joined when I was age 32. I was hired to be their divisional president of the bioproducts division. It was the youngest divisional president in the company. I was promoted to corporate vice president of the whole company in addition to being the divisional president, and it was the youngest corporate vice president in their 100-year history. It was very fast paced, and it's a very large company. The best way to describe what ADM produces is the following. When you go to the grocery store and you go down those grocery aisles, and you look to your left and your right, and you look at all those food and beverages on those shelves, you pull any food or beverage off that shelf and you read that ingredient label on the side of that package. 9 times out of 10, at least one ingredient in that food or beverage was produced by ADM. They are one of the largest food additive companies in the world. When I joined them in October of 1989, my position was I was president of the bioproducts division, which was the fastest growing division. We invested over $1 billion in that division, and it was the bioproducts, the higher tech product. Prior to ADM, a lot of my decisions were made with committee. But at ADM, there was a lot quicker decision making, and I had to make a lot of decisions on my own. Even though it was a very large Fortune 100 company, it operated as a very entrepreneur type of company. And then if there was a mistake made and it would cost a $4 or $5 million mistake, they would rather have the mistake made because you still move quicker and get in the market 2 or 3 years earlier. My salary, especially for a young executive at age 32, I was earning, and keep in mind this was over 20 years ago. So with inflation, these numbers would have a lot higher value today, but it was $350,000 base salary 20 years ago, 2 decades ago, and tens of thousands of shares of stock options that would have been worth several $1 million of stock options. So there was a big incentive to get the company to grow as fast as you could, to get the stock price to go up as quick as you could. And we were watching the stock price quarter to quarter, because the quicker the stock price went up, the quicker our own personal stock options went up. Because at that point in time, I was 34 years old, and we were having problems with our lysine plant. It was one of the biggest investments in the division that I was president of. It was a $300 million investment. The plant was already running for 9 or 10 months, and it was losing $7 million per month because we just had so much contamination. It was so high tech compared to what ADM was used to. We just couldn't get it right. We didn't quite have the science infrastructure in that plant. We had too much of a commodity thinking, and we couldn't get it right. So we had lots of contamination. So the CEO, who was so powerful in that company, he talked about closing that plant down, which would have been very embarrassing to me being president of the division. So I went to my management, which was his son, was the vice chairman of the company, and I told him, I said, I think we got some contamination, some sabotage going on. In order to buy time where I could keep that plant open, I was in my early 30s, and I just wasn't willing to accept that we can't get it right, we can't get it done. He told his father, and his father's good friends with the CIA, and his father told about that we thought we had sabotage going on based on what I told his son. And in turn, the CIA contacted the FBI to try to help resolve it.
So a couple things you heard. You heard him talk about he was a young executive, very aggressive environment, and he really didn't want to fail. Okay, so I want to let you finish, and I'll let you finish this clip, and I'll tell you some more about the story.
When I first joined the company in 1989, quickly I was hearing from other employees within a month or two that price fixing was going on rampant through the corporation. And it was even proven in court and during the investigation that price fixing was going on for years before I joined the company. But when employees were telling me price fixing was going on, I just kept thinking in my mind, well, I'm president of the bioproducts division, which is the biotech group. It's a new wave. It's the high tech. It won't reach our division. It will never reach it. And that was my thinking in 1989. But in spring of 1992, as we were getting the plant to operate better, there was some lower prices because when you enter a new business with such a large manufacturing plant, the most common thing is prices go down because you're a new producer of a product, a new producer of a commodity, and the prices were going down quick. And that's when the vice chairman who I reported to told me he was going to have me work with the division president of the corn division. He said not to work for him, to work with him as a mentor, but only for a few months for him to teach me the way ADM does business. I already knew about the price fixing ongoing from other executives before that point. So I knew what that meant when he said how ADM does business, that's when price fixing was going to be introduced to the division that I was president of. I had to make a decision, do I stay with the company until I leave? But in my early 30s, with the salary package I was obtaining, I had a 13,000 square foot house with an 8-car garage. I had full with 8 cars. I wouldn't have had passion for your work, do things that are really important for the community. I was all about moving up the corporate ladder. Even though I had very long-term thinking during my youth, I lost my moral compass during that time, and my focus was definitely on how far can I get in that company, how much money can I make, and greed became the priority. And so therefore, it was a fairly easy decision for me to make, say, well, look, if the management's doing it, if they've been doing it for a long time, if other companies are doing it, I started rationalizing, thinking maybe it's not that bad if so many people are doing it. And that was my rationalization to say, instead of fight it, I'll join it.
Okay, so Mark is known as the highest level corporate executive in U.S. history to become an FBI whistleblower. And he was an informant for 3 years, but he lost his immunity. And the reason why he lost his immunity is because Mrs. Martin Ginger, when he was in prison. So he lost his immunity because Mark knew that he was going to blow the whistle on the international price fixing scam. He knew that. And he was really concerned that if I do this, I'm not going to be able to get another job. So what he decided to do while he was an informant was embezzle $8 million from ADM. And so when the FBI found out that he was now this embezzler informant, of course he lost his immunity. But he was really scared because he thought, once I'm known as this whistleblower, who's going to hire me? So that was sort of his security blanket. Now, it didn't work out that well. The FBI was not pleased. But Matt Damon went on to make a movie about him. It's called The Informant. It came out maybe 8-9 years ago. But that's Mark Whitacre, and that's his story. So you heard him talk about this pressure. Everyone was doing it. This behavior was commonplace, and it was rewarded. So that's why he did it. Just more about what happened at ADM. They settled federal charges for more than $100 million. and they paid hundreds of millions more to plaintiffs and customers. Now, a story that Mark told me, that I have no way to confirm this, so this is just interview gossip. He said that the companies, the Kellogg's of the world, were so happy that he came forward and disclosed the information about the international price fixing scandal that the companies joined together, Kraft, Kellogg, and pooled together their money and took care of his family while he was in federal prison. So his wife and his kids went back. His kids went to college. His wife went back to college, and that money came from the companies because they saved so much because there was no price fixing. Now this is his story. I have no way of confirming it. It's just an interesting story. So don't repeat that. Turn the video off. But that's the story. But one of the things that you've heard here, and one of the lessons learned, is the importance of having a speak up culture. Mark didn't feel like he could say anything. He felt like he had to go along with what the practice was, so he did. He didn't feel like he could fail. Now, this was years ago, so this wasn't in this culture now where we're all talking about failure is good. Mark didn't feel that he could do that, so he said, how do I keep playing this game? How do I keep this company looking successful, my business looking successful? And something else that you heard him say, or that you saw, the speed over ethics was more important. And that's what they focused in his situation. So again, these are little short clips. We spent a day typically when we're doing an interview. And Mark's interview was interesting because we flew out to St. Louis and noticed that there was this hotel, really nice hotel that had super cheap hotel rooms. So they were like really cheap, like $20 a night. Well, we got there and realized that the whole hotel was under construction. So all of those sounds that you hear, we're sitting in the middle of a construction site doing the interview because that's why the room was so cheap. So we didn't know. So we're going to switch gears a little bit to a different case. We're going to talk about what happened in Dixon, Illinois. As you see in the headline, Rita Crunwell stole $53 million from the city of Dixon between 1990 and 2012. And so here's Rita. She looks like a nice person, right? Don't you? She's smiling. She's with her horse. That horse is good, I will be. I will show you the trailer just for the sake of time. I think this first one is the trailer. So the trailers are the documentary. So I had this bright idea that I wanted to make a movie about what was going on in Dixon. And so I had people that we were doing these interviews anyway. And I thought, wow, what a crazy story. First of all, where is Dixon, Illinois? That was my first question. Second question is, why does Dixon, Illinois have so much money? How did they accumulate millions and millions of dollars? So I'll show you the trailer to the film, and then I'll tell you about the story and about the process.
She completely pulled the wool over her town's eyes.
Do you think you were just smarter than everybody else, Freda?
$53+ million is just unbelievable.
She lived quite a life, totally different life than what she portrayed here.
By day, she's wearing municipal clothes, and by night, she's dripping with jewels and furs.
Your champion, Rita Crunwell.
She had this grand, high-stakes horse empire.
My first thought was, Dixon has that much money that you could embezzle that much money from a little tiny place like this?
People just trusted her so well, more than anything.
Rita, how did you go to bed and not think, whose lives I'm infecting here?
One of the things that I wanted to find out was, did she do this alone? Was she hiding from somebody else?
For 20 years I worked side by side with this woman, and I never knew her. I never really knew her.
So, Rita doesn't like me that much. I can tell you that now. I started this project in 2012. This is a little flat.
Driving the train, so I'll pass it.
All right, you can pass it out on the train. That's what I do. I can take them everywhere I go. The project started in 2012, and we started going back and forth to Dixon. and doing these interviews and trying to really understand how the fraud happened. And so what's interesting about this case and this story is we all have a Rita Crunwell in our organization. Not someone that's going to steal $53 million from you, but someone that we unconditionally trust. And once we trust them, we relax all internal controls. Rita was the internal control. Everyone trusted her. Whatever she said is what they did. And so if you know of, or maybe not you, but maybe someone else, they have the best finance person in their organization, right? Your accountant, your finance person, they're good with the books. And if they put their resignation letter on your desk today, you'd be devastated. They're the glue to your organization. Does anybody know anybody like that? Mm-hmm. That's who Rita was. And so she controlled everything. And so there were tons of red flags that were missed in the city of Dixon. So I love this question. What red flags were missed? Everything. Everything. Dixon had an annual budget between $6 and $8 million. And Rita embezzled $53.7 million over 20 years. The documentary really focuses on the discovery and the fraud. And the fraud was discovered by the person that you saw in the last clip, which was her name was Kathy Swanson. And she was the person that reported to Rita. And so Kathy discovered the fraud and didn't think it was fraud at first. She thought Rita is evading taxes. She's not stealing money because Rita would never do that. And so that's what she thought at first. And she took the information and gave the information to the mayor at the time, Mayor Burke, who's now passed away. And they looked and they launched this investigation and realized that no, Rita in fact was embezzling money. And so Rita Crunwell had she was one of the #1 quarter horse breeders in the country. So she owned over 400 quarter horses, and they were in a ranch in Dixon, Illinois, and a ranch in Beloit, Wisconsin. She had horses all over the country. So this became a very large federal case, and everyone trusted her. This fraud started in the late 80s. There was a sister city that Dixon had in Germany, and so they had an account set up that covered travel for people that wanted to come from Germany and go to Dixon and see how their government works. So there was an account set up for that purpose. And Rita started stealing money from that account in around 1988. And so it was around $25,000. And so when the city decided to turn that account and have nonprofit status, Rita lost access to that account. And so she opened a secret account. And she was the only one that had access to this secret account. So all she did was move money from their capital development fund into this secret account. And she bought horses, she bought jewelry, she threw parties, she bought real estate, she bought motor coaches, and no one questioned it. She made $80,000 a year as of 2012, but yet owned over 400 horses. Now, you're probably saying, if I lived in Dixon, I would know that amount of money was missing, right? Remember the icebreaker at the beginning. Didn't notice anything, maybe you wouldn't. What about auditors? What about the auditors? So you wouldn't think that's going to be there, right? So happens every year. Right. So the documentary talks about these 4 key players: the auditors, the bank, the commissioners, and the residents. And so what about the auditors? The auditors were Clifton Larson Allen. And the Clifton Larson Allen Dixon office did the audit for the city. And that same office did the audit of her horse operation. Not the same person, same office. So that's, the best office in Dixon. So you have city being audited by Clifton, horse operation being audited, or doing her tax returns. Okay, same office, different people. So the auditors did talk to the city of Dixon and say, there's some internal control weaknesses here. You have one person doing all of these things. That's an internal control weakness. Now, one of the things we talk about in accounting is who is responsible for the financial statements? Is it the auditors or is it management? Answer is? Who is it? I know there's some accountants in the room. Management. So it would have been the responsibility of the management to do something with the information that they got. However, these auditors were involved in the day-to-day operations of the town. So they were essentially auditing their own work, which we know is a no. So these auditors were highly negligent, which is why the auditors paid a significant amount of money. I'm trying to tell you about the story without telling you everything, so you can go and watch the movie tonight. So these auditors were pretty negligent. The bank was Fifth Third Bank. The final bank was Fifth Third Bank because there were mergers and things. So the final bank on record was Fifth Third Bank, where the city of Dixon had their account. And so they paid because they didn't follow their own bank regulations. For example, checks weren't endorsed correctly. And so Rita would just say treasurer and wouldn't specify where type of treasurer was it from Petunia Festival, like where it was coming from. So they weren't following their own types of regulations, but it's Dixon. And everybody knows Rita. She probably went to high school with the person that she was dealing with at the bank. They all knew each other. So the commissioners. So the commissioners were very friendly and very trusting of Rita. And Rita was the end all be all. We didn't have to really do our work because Rita handled it. And that was really the role of the commissioners and the residents. The residents played a role as well. So I've been screening all of these horses since 2017. A week has not gone by that I haven't gotten an email about someone asking about, I have a fraud in my town. Can you come and show all the Queen's horses? Scare everybody. I swear to you not. This is still going on. Well, one of the most important screenings that we did was in Dixon. So we took the film back to Dixon. We screened it in Dixon in the fall of 2017 and spring of 2018. I can comfortably say almost everybody in the town of Dixon has seen the movie. We had free screenings because clearly we couldn't say come buy a movie ticket to see about the woman that stole $1 million from me. So it was free for the residents, free for everybody that wanted to come. But the film has a tone of these four key players. It's not a Rita bashing movie. It's really, how did the fraud happen? How did all of these people miss what was going on? Yes.
I'm just trying to put some of these overarching numbers together. So $53 billion, right, embezzled or stolen over 20 years, right? And the budget of the town was
6 and 8 million.
6 and 8 million. So, I mean, without even thinking about all the different ways people can behave and overlook things, and they all know each other, and it's a small town. So she, if I'm understanding, sort of did it because she was sort of skimming small amount every year over 20 years.
Sometimes
so it was imperceptible in a sense. Is that?
Sometimes small amounts. And during the recession, the amounts rose to like $5.8 million. So
well, that's half of the budget of the town. So how does that
happen? You gotta watch the movie. You do. But I'll tell you this. Now I'm showing you slides from after you've seen the movie. So one of the things that we talk about is how she did it was through phony invoices. You know, one of the oldest tricks in the book. And so I'll show you what we talk about in the film. This is a phony invoice that Rita used. And so this is a phony invoice. This is a legitimate invoice. Okay? Phony, legitimate. Now, notice on the legitimate invoice, you see a logo, and you aren't going to see any misspellings here. So you see the word location, you see local section, you see route, you see section, county, you see this. You see address, you see city, state, zip, and you see a phone number. Okay? That's the legitimate one. Look at her phony. No logo. The word section is spelled wrong. It's spelled S-E-C-T-O-N. Now, we know how to spell it, but you might not pick up on it that it's spelled wrong. Down here, address, city, state, zip, no phone number. Now, side by side, you can tell that they're different, right? Here is, phony, legitimate. If you have them side by side. But if you are a first year staff, and I heard somebody say they're in the program at Loyola. I heard you say you didn't even know I was listening to you, didn't you? And you've been in the program 2 weeks, right? Is that what I heard?
I'm at Baker Tilly right now. I go to
You go low, you've been in that program 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Okay, so I thought I heard. And so think about it, you first year, first on the job, and you saw this. Would you know that it's phony? By itself, you might not know. And so this was one of the ways that she embezzled millions of the dollars through these phony invoices. And she had 179 phony invoices. Now, 179 by itself sounds like a lot, right? But think about how many invoices a town generates over a 20-year period.
Where's the check being paid to? Same address, payable?
You're looking down here?
Yeah. What is the difference between that and the other one?
Let's see.
2300 South Dixon. So you're sending a check to the same place?
Yeah.
Except the phone number and the.
Yeah.
And who really cared? I mean, what difference does it make if the thing is spelled wrong?
Well,
Except for it's phony.
Yeah, well, but think about this. Most of our invoices, I mean, those are red flags that are ignored because most of our invoices don't have misspellings on them. If
Correct.
they did,
Correct.
you would probably
So the
be.
check gets cut from this and it goes to that place. Unless she's handling it.
Well, so the check never got cut. So this is just what she created in case someone asked, because this never happened. So these are phony invoices for fictitious projects.
Just a couple
Okay.
of traps.
Absolutely. Okay. So this is again how she embezzled lots of money. She had significant input on the budget process. She explained the shortfalls were from late tax revenue payments from the state. And her words, in 2012, the financial situation was borderline catastrophic. That's what she said about it. Now, one of the things we do in the film is we compare over this time period what was going on in the town versus what Rita was doing. And this is from the FBI. And so look at the date at the top, 3/11/2002. There was a special council meeting, and Commissioner Richmond was going through all the things that they had to cut because they didn't have enough money. While they were making all these cuts, while Rita was sitting there in this meeting, this is what Rita was doing. Cromwell stole $2.9 million from the city in 2002. She used the stolen money to pay for such expenses like a motorhome. She bought a horse named She Scores for $200,000. She also purchased a Chevy Corvette for her boyfriend, who has since broken up with her, for $55,599. So while they're cutting, she's stealing. And so what the FBI did is they put together this really nice timeline. And in 2002, this is what was stolen. But this was the tally, 2.9 million. But to date was $10 million. Now remember, we had to get up to 53.7 million. So she was having a field day. So because I was doing this film, the U.S. Marshal Service gave me access to visit her motor, her ranch, take video and pictures of her motor coach. We traveled to Florida to capture her house that she owned there. We inventoried all of her assets. I mean, she had everything. So like we went around and put numbers on everything. We were in Florida. And so this is just an image of her trophy room. So when you went to Dixon, the ranch, you pull up and you see all this ranch filled with this beautiful lumber bins. And it was locally sourced lumber. And then she had this trophy room at the ranch. So when she had a guest, she would entertain them here. And so from the ceiling to the floor are just winnings. She was one of the #1 quarter horse breeds. She won 52 world championships in quarter horses. I know tons about quarter horses now that I never thought I would ever know. But that's Rita. Trying to tell you things without telling you things, but I want you to understand that Mark Whitacre's comment of white-collar felons are not born, they're developed through time. I think what Rita realized was no one was looking. And so a lot of times when I'm in front of student audiences, I'll ask them a question before I show them the film. I'll say, if you walked into the classroom and you saw a table with just a bag of money sitting there, what would you do? tell me the first things that come to your mind. And they'll say, well, I would start thinking, does the room have a camera? What time does the next class come in? How old am I? How much money do I think is in the bag? Have I passed the CPA exam? Am I married? Are my parents alive? They're doing a cost-benefit analysis. Is it worth it to take the money? And typically there's some student that will say, well, I would just turn it into the security guard downstairs. And everyone just like pounces on this person. Like, why would you do that? The security guard's just gonna steal the money. You should get yours first. And so I try to relate to them. That's how Rita looked at the city of Dixon. No one was paying attention. And so I just do that little exercise first, show them the film, and then they'll say, are you trying to say that we're like Rita? I'm like, well, that's how Rita looked at the city. There were no internal controls. She was the internal control. So the city was like just an open safe, just sitting in the middle of the street. How many people are gonna walk by before someone takes? And she noticed that no one was paying attention. Whatever she said is what they did. So a couple psychological theories we think about when we talk about why no one noticed this. And it really, with the residents, the auditors, the commissioners, the bank, we think about cognitive dissonance. The more committed we are to a belief, the harder it is to relinquish, even in the face of overwhelming, contradictory evidence that something is wrong. Think about this. Rita made $80,000 a year in 2012, but yet she owned 400 horses. She took 4 months off a year. 4 months. Who has a 4-month vacation in this room? 4 months off, and no one thought that that was odd. She was out of the office 4 months, still ran the town, but yet no one ever thought that that seemed odd. So instead of acknowledging an error in judgment and abandoning the opinion, we tend to develop a new attitude or belief that justifying retaining it. And so no one ever thought that Rita could steal. And she knew that, and she was able to manipulate everyone. Other things, confirmation, the tendency to put more weight on information consistent with initial beliefs, and availability, the tendency to consider information that's easily accessible as being more relevant. Just two other theories that often happen and allow us not to identify fraud when we see it. So the last story I'll leave you with is one of my own personal stories. And so that's me, and that's my friend Bob. And Bob used to teach at DePaul with me. He was an instructor, and he taught financial accounting. And so Bob and I are sitting down, and we're doing an interview because I wanted to capture his story before I could no longer capture it. And so Bob was, like I said, he was an instructor at DePaul, but he also was a very successful real estate attorney. And that's his house in Oak Brook. That was his house. I told you he was pretty successful at that. And so, as you see, it says in prison, real estate lawyer, so the story doesn't end well. But what happened is Bob was involved. You see the headline from the Department of Justice. Bob was involved in a mortgage fraud scheme. And so you see the headlines, 2 attorneys among 4 defendants indicted in 2 separate mortgage fraud schemes involving Southside properties. And so this article is about Bob. And Bob had a client that was recruiting straw buyers in these mortgage transactions. And Bob claimed that he didn't know that the client was involved in this scheme. Evidence showed that he did, and Bob was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. So I was there for his sentencing. And he is 41 now. He has 3 kids. His oldest is 8. And he's looking at 8 years in federal prison. And really, this story was really shocking to me because I've worked with him for years. His office was right beside mine. I never would have imagined that he would get himself involved in something like this. He calls me, so I get calls. I'm not going to tell you how he calls me, but he does call. He emails me and just sort of, tells me about his experience in federal prison because he's there now. It's not a prison call. He just calls. It's a phone call. I don't know how he calls.
It's to figure out how to handle
It's just a phone call. I ask no questions. I just answer the phone, and it's him. And so we don't ask. But he calls me, the last conversation he said to me, he's like, Kelly, you really need to come visit. There's tons of stories for you. You'd love it. There's so many people for you to talk to. So you should come. I'm like, you know what, Bob, I will come see you. So he's in Terre Haute, Indiana. But he's going to be there for a while. And again, I would have never imagined that someone that I worked with, someone that I felt like I knew, would be engaged in something like this. And so you never know. So key takeaways to hope this never happens in your organization or to someone you know. Be sure to test and update all internal controls, especially when if you have a lot of turnover, a lot of people coming and going. Make sure that you monitor access. Make sure you do that. Perform a whistleblowing assessment. Make sure that people would actually tell you something if something was going on. I had a cheating scandal in my managerial accounting class this past quarter. And I went out to get some water during an exam. And when I left the room, a student stands up and says, hey, what'd you guys get for number 17? I got B. What did you get? That's what the student does. And so I come back in the classroom, everyone's heads down, everyone's writing, everyone's working. And I get a text message saying, Professor Pope, I don't know how to tell you this. I've never been in this situation, but I have to talk to you about something that happened when you went out of the room. Now, what bothered me was I only got one text message from one student. I should have gotten 35 other text messages from other students because I always thought that I created a culture where people would come forward and tell me something. So this one student tells me, the student of course denies it. We go back and forth all day. So I send this email out to my students and I said, class, hypothetically speaking, if I told you that I had a camera recording your actions when I left the room for that 11 minutes, is there anything you want to tell me about what you did during that period of time? You have till end of day. And all the messages start coming. And so they say things like, I didn't see anybody doing anything. Well, that's a very telling response because I didn't even ask you was someone doing anything. So I start getting all these kinds of messages. But I use that story to say, just make sure you have a culture where someone would tell you if something's going on. Hack your system. Get a group of people together and figure out how could you defraud your own system, because that'll let you know where all the holes are. And make sure you have a really good internal decision-making training or workshop. Don't call it ethics training. Because everyone's ethical. No one needs ethics training. Call it something else. And have some really good scenarios in there that people have to make a decision about, and you'll get some really interesting answers. So with that, if you have my email's here. If you have questions, I think we have like 40 whole seconds for a question, if you have any. But I will stop talking.
I find it's more in times when people have been in the same positions all for many years. That's where I feel like stuff could happen than turnover. I think turnover is great because it causes people to go, what is your process? How did you come to that conclusion? And it's the defensiveness that makes my flag go up.
Yeah. So I didn't hear the beginning part of your question.
Well, you said earlier, just a slide or two ago, those times when you have a lot of turnover.
Yeah. So when you have,
I think it's the reverse when fraud and behavior.
When you have the same person in place.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's sort of a combination of both, because when you have a lot of turnover, just monitor the access that people have. Because sometimes you might not realize that there's an opening or someone has access that you may not realize. And the story that I reflect on when I say that is there's a gentleman that I interviewed about 4 years ago who embezzled $8 million from ING. And the way he was able to do it is because he received training that he wasn't supposed to receive, and he didn't speak up and say anything. So he got access and authority to approve checks over $250,000, and he had access to things. And no one really knew. His name was included in a group that it shouldn't have been. So that's really the story that I think about when I say like monitor your access. But I agree with you. When you have that person that's been in place for a long time that won't take a vacation and then they go away, that may show you that they're up to something.
So it's one person that's bringing down the whole ship.
It's always
And
one
then
person.
everyone you know didn't get away with it, right?
Everyone I know?
Everyone you know did not get away with
Right.
it, actually, right? Because you're interviewing them.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
didn't get away with it, right?
Yeah.
They were able to do it to a point.
To a point.
They got
Just like
caught.
Rita. Rita was good until she wasn't. She was pretty good. I mean, keep a town running for 20 years, a horse empire, and then it all.
How much did they recoup?
They recouped. You have to watch the film. No, they recouped.
I get that. I'll watch it.
They recouped $40 million.
$40
Yeah.
million, all right?
Yeah. Yes.
Excuse me, I'm assuming that someone's done a mental health evaluation assessment.
Of Rita?
No,
Oh.
all the right health. Because my understanding is there's a higher incidence of psychopathy and bipolar, and folks that, I'm a physician by training.
Yeah.
I actually worked in the system.
Yeah.
So I've been a part of evaluating on the other side of this balance.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting for me to see, if not everyone, obviously, it's like anything in life, but many of these behaviors started, when they were in grade school or teenagers, certain things like bipolar, impulsivity.
Yeah.
And nobody noticed it. It's kind of like what you're saying here, nobody was aware of the mental illness, and they were kind of pushing down the behavior.
And I think it's a good comment. It's an interesting comment. The concern I often have, and my best friend's a clinical psychologist, so we have this debate all the time. And my always concern is it sometimes allows us to say that's them and not us. And so one of the things that I notice in audiences is we are our thought process is very similar to some of the things that people are doing. And so that means that we all may have some level of mental health issue because we agree, we push the envelope, so many of us. And so the people that I tend to interview are not your scam artists, con artists. They are people that picked up the wrong card, charged a vacation using the corporate card instead of their personal card, didn't reverse it, realized that no one was paying attention, and then just went on a shopping spree. Not shopping spree, but also a shopping spree. And so I get emails and calls from the firm saying, the accounting firm saying, we have an expense reimbursement problem with our interns. So
I'm familiar with, I do the same.
yeah, he's different.
There's mental.
Yeah. But so Richard Scrushy, so for sure Richard Scrushy has some issues. And if you catch him on YouTube, you can still see those issues now. But Aaron Beam, Weston Smith, and the people that reported to him, not so much, So, but you remind me of my best friend. Yeah. So I want to leave you with one thing unless anyone has a question. Last thing is, if you're ever interested, this is a new experience that we'll be doing at DePaul, and it's called Red Flag Mania. So if you like investigations and you want to solve like a whodunit, I'm going to show you a little trailer to this whole experience, and then I will stop talking and we can go home.
So I'm starting to notice something's getting fishy. You didn't notice anything. I sure do.
We were the standout church in the community. But when the money started slowing up, so did our contribution to the town.
Church activities have been cut due to lack of funds. It could be anything or anyone.
I mean, where's everybody's loyalty when things get rough?
Are you still members?
I sure am. So, where's the money?
So your whole idea, the whole purpose is you have to first figure out the perpetrator. You have to find all the internal control weaknesses in this organization, and then you have to go through all the fraud schemes. And so this is based on a true story. So it's like Clue, but real. So that's it for me, Eric. You want
I was just going to lead applause and say thank you. That was fantastic. So,
Thank you.
It was just fascinating, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. There's one more round of applause. So thank you, Kelly. Thank you to all of you for coming out. Thank you to the Executives Club. If you're not a member of the Executives Club and you'd like to be, Executives Club staff, raise your hand. You can go talk to any one of them, and they'll tell you more about the club. Thank you. Please feel free to enjoy appetizers and some wine and beer and water or soft drinks for a little while longer. I'm going to kick you out probably in about 15 to 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really nice. Thank you. I'm curious how millennials we talk to them. Oh,
Yeah.
like what they're gonna come up